Good evening and welcome to Congresswoman Nikki Tsongas' telephone town hall meeting. In just a moment, Congresswoman Tsongas will give a few brief opening remarks, and then anyone joining the call will have an opportunity to ask her your questions. If you would like to ask the Congresswoman a question at any point during the call, simply press star 3 on your phone. And since we anticipate that many people on the call will have questions, after pressing star 3, you'll be connected with a member of the Congresswoman's staff who will take down some of your information so that we can connect you with the Congresswoman in turn. We'll try to get to answer as many questions as possible during the course of the next hour, and to do so, we unfortunately won't have time for follow-up questions. One quick technical issue that I want to point out before we get started is that there is sometimes a bit of a lag time between questions. So please stay with us. If there's a brief pause in the discussion as we move to the next question, the Congresswoman will be hosting this call for the next hour. If we're unable to get to your question this evening, you will have the opportunity to leave a voicemail for Congresswoman Tsongas at the end of the call, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Again, if you would like to ask Congresswoman Tsongas a question, please press star 3 on your phone. And with that, I will turn it over to Congresswoman Nikki Tsongas.
Good evening, and thank you all for joining me. It's great to have you all on this call. I appreciate so much the opportunity to connect through these virtual town halls and having the luxury of talking with you while you are in the comfort of your own home. And it allows me to reach so many more people than I could through a traditional town hall forum, although I like to do those as well. I know there are many issues on your minds, and as you heard, we will try to answer as many questions as possible during the next hour. So as a reminder, to ask me a question or give your input at any point, just press star 3 on your telephone. Before we begin, though, there are a few topics I'd like to cover as we get started, and then I look forward to taking some of your questions. First and foremost, I have heard from so many about your concerns with our still fragile economy. We have seen some signs that lend some hope. We see the stock market rebounding. Housing prices have stabilized and are beginning to come back. We know that we have more revenue coming into the federal government due to the elimination of Bush tax cuts for the highest income earners, and the cuts to government spending through sequestration and the Budget Control Act have had a positive impact. But we still have a lot of work to do and a lot of challenges ahead. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about the sequester, as we are starting to feel the major impacts brought about by these automatic budget cuts known as a sequester, which went into place in February. And originally, they were enacted as a motivation for Congress to find a comprehensive solution to America's economic woes and to deal with our debt and deficit. These automatic cuts are split evenly between the defense side of the equation and other non-defense programs, both of which on the defense side and the other programs require annual decision-making on the part of those in Congress. But the sequester, what it does is blindly slash across the top of all federal agency budgets, half on the defense side, half on the side of all other non-defense government programs. So resources that many of our citizens use on a daily basis are at risk, everything from educational opportunities, meal assistance for our seniors, public safety initiatives as well. I have certainly urged my colleagues in Congress to seek a broader solution to the dangerous impacts of this kind of budgeting. These drastic cuts threaten to stifle our economy, that over the past few years has really been showing some signs of recovery, as I just mentioned. But tens of thousands of people in Massachusetts face the very real possibility of job loss, while countless others more still feel the impact in their daily lives. So we know we have much to do. And as a result of the sequester, we're starting to see furloughs take place. For example, at Hanscom Air Force Base, which is the only active duty base in New England, it employs thousands of Defense Department civilians. They are going to be getting notices of upcoming furloughs for up to 2 weeks or more of of the coming months of their work year. And as well, millions of dollars will be lost in pay and millions more in construction, modernization, and maintenance, which leaves many local contractors without work. So we have to find a balanced approach that relieves the painful impact of the sequester, and we need to do it soon, which is why I also believe we need to pass a budget. I'm sorry that the House and Senate have not been able to come together to get a final budget done. The House has passed its budget, the Senate has passed its budget, but we have to come together to find a resolution that can pass both houses of Congress and be signed by our president. And doing that is critical to creating good-paying American jobs, stopping the sequester cuts, and growing the economy as we get our fiscal house in order. Again, to ask me a question or give your input at any point, just press *3 on your telephone. I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the high-profile instances of misconduct, alleged misconduct by government agencies. We've heard the Internal Revenue Service, the Department of Justice, and the United States military are all facing scrutiny from members of Congress as a result of these high-profile instances of alleged misconduct. I believe that it is absolutely essential that an agency such as the Internal Revenue Service, which has access to every citizen's most personal information, must be unquestionably apolitical. In that case, the activity of what appears to be a small group of IRS employees was truly alarming. It showed utter incompetence, it tarnished the integrity of the entire agency, and it deserves to be condemned. The same standards must be applied to all tax-exempt organizations, and all organizations seeking this status ought to be looked at closely. So we must take immediate and appropriate action to make sure that the IRS remains a fair, independent, and impartial agency, and that those responsible are held accountable. Again, to ask me a question or give your input at any point, just press *3 on your telephone. I'd also like to address Benghazi. Last week, I was part of a briefing with military officials that looked at how the Department of Defense responded to the attack at Benghazi on the U.S. Embassy in Libya. I am the top Democrat on the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations. As such, I led the questioning of the witnesses to help clarify exactly what happened on that tragic day and the ways in which the Department of Defense and our military was able to respond. And the other issue that I have really focused on since being elected, I have worked very hard on combating sexual assault in the military. In the last several weeks, several members of the armed forces who are tasked with leading other soldiers and some responsible for preventing these horrible crimes were themselves accused of perpetrating them. It has become painfully evident that saying the military has a cultural problem in regard to sexual assault and sexual misconduct is a glaring understatement. At worst, this is a deep-rooted and widespread acceptance of unprofessional, inappropriate, and criminal behavior, and at best, it's a willful denial or head-turning on the part of too many military leaders. So last week, I introduced bipartisan legislation. I have worked closely with Congressman Turner from Ohio, and bipartisan on the House side, bicameral in that Senator McCaskill and Senator Collins of Maine worked with us to, again, on the same legislation to address some flaws in the military's code of justice and help create an environment that will not discourage victims from coming forward. I have also worked with colleagues in the House and the Senate to extend protections and policies to victims in the Coast Guard. For the protection of our brave servicemen and women, we have got to get this right, and I am committed to doing so. Again, another reminder to ask me a question or give your input at any point, just press *3 on your telephone. Again, also I recently made a trip to Afghanistan. Since becoming a member of Congress and as a member of the Armed Services Committee, I have made it a priority to support the men and women who serve their country. So over Mother's Day, I traveled with 5 other Congresswomen to Afghanistan on a congressional delegation trip. This was my 5th visit to Afghanistan and the 3rd time I've gone on Mother's Day. These trips really do give me invaluable experience of hearing directly from our military leaders, as well as our individual service members who are serving our country on the ground in Afghanistan. I get to hear what their needs are. the support that they and their families need and deserve. And in particular, on Mother's Day, it gives me a chance to thank our military moms, women soldiers who are away from their families, serving their countries overseas, but who miss their families always, but poignantly so on Mother's Day. And we also make a point of meeting with Afghan women to see what the gains have been for Afghan women as we have been involved in that country for well over a decade. So I was able to visit with some women cadets at the country's military academy. I met with women, female professors and students attending a university in Afghanistan's third largest city. 40% of the students there are women. We met with some extraordinary women leaders, and I happen to believe that one of the great success stories of our presence there has been the unprecedented gains that have been made by women, by and for women, and that we have to be very thoughtful how to protect those gains as we draw down our forces there. Again, to ask me a question or give your input at any point, just press *3 on your telephone. As I said, this telephone town hall is an opportunity for me to hear directly from you, and now I'd like to go to your questions.
Great. We will open the call up for questions now, and our first question will come from Peter from Fitchburg. Peter, you're live with the Congresswoman.
Hello, Congresswoman Tsongas, and I want to thank you in particular for inviting me as a conservative columnist. It speaks very well of you that you would invite me to the town, make it a point to proactively invite me to the town meeting.
Thank you for joining us.
Oh, very happy to be here. I actually have the base question, and there was something else I wanted to bring up because you were talking about Afghanistan. My main question is, do you support an independent counsel in the Eric Holder business at this time? And you also mentioned just a few moments ago about being careful to make sure the gains from women in Afghanistan aren't lost as we draw down. Is there anything in particular you would suggest in order to secure that? Because I don't think it's talked about enough.
Great questions, both. I think our president has been very public and very active in his responses to the IRS scandals as well as the others. I personally appreciate how candid he's been and the efforts he's made to achieve and increase transparency as we move forward with looking at these events, which certainly do warrant our attention. I think he's been out there every day, has been open to answering questions. Each one of these issues, though, I think has its own set of complex details, and they have to be looked at individually. I don't think any of these have been motivated or generated by a political motivations, but I do think we can handle them one at a time, and I'm confident that our president and Congress will work together to do that. In terms of Afghanistan, I think there are a number of ways in which we need to be very thoughtful. One is that I think we have to ensure a free and fair election coming up in April of 2014 in which women are fully able to participate. I think we have to be very mindful as the Taliban are brought to the negotiating table as they've tried to move through a reconciliation process, that women are at that table and making strong demands that we do not negotiate away all those gains in the interest of bringing the Taliban to the table. And I think the ways in which we use our aid can be very much hinge upon the fact that gains for women are not, as I said, traded away. The gains have really been remarkable. If you think that 40% of the women at a major university, are now female, if you think that millions of young girls as well as young boys are being educated on a daily basis, these are very important gains, and we can't let them just, as I say, be traded away.
For that, Congresswoman, next we're going to go to Keith from Townsend. Keith, you are live with the Congresswoman.
Hello, Congresswoman Tsongas. I'm from Townsend, Massachusetts, and my question deals with sequestration. First of all, I am an employee of the Department of the Army. I went to work today, and I received a furlough notification. And my concerns are, we just gave $1.2 billion to both Afghanistan and, to Pakistan and Egypt. Why does the government's civilian workforce get punished for the mess Congress, both the Democrats and the Republicans, put this country in?
Well, it's a good question, and I'm so sorry to hear about your furlough. It's one of the things that we knew would come if we couldn't resolve the sequester, and I'm sorry to hear that this is the case. The sequester was really created as a Damocles sword. It was enacted as a motivation for Congress to find a comprehensive solution to America's economic woes, and it turned out that essentially the Damocles sword was too blunt, and did not force my either side to the table. So these automatic cuts which were never meant to take place, are now in place. And I think the real solution going forward, and you're not alone in the impact. Several months ago, I heard from the manager of Lawrence Municipal Airport, notified us that as a result of sequestration, he would have to close their air traffic control tower. We've heard of other airports across the country who were facing furloughs. Fortunately, we were able to pass legislation which gave them some flexibility, and which is legislation that I voted for. But this bill, which is aimed to just at one small consequence of sequestration, does not really solve the problem. What we really do have to do is find a balanced approach, which acknowledges that there's a room for a comprehensive and a balanced approach to deficit reduction that combines additional spending cuts that can be done in a thoughtful way with new revenue sources. Every bipartisan group that has looked at this problem has said that this is the way we have to go forward. And we know we can do it. We have put in place some new revenue. As we faced the Bush tax cuts, we were able to extend them for middle-income Americans, but let them lapse for upper-income earners, families making over $450,000. So that brought new revenue to the table, but we also enacted some thoughtful cuts through the Budget Control Act. So I think going forward we have to do so in a balanced way that is both about revenue and about additional spending cuts. And so I am hopeful that as furloughs such as you are experiencing, the other kinds of ways in which it is impacting. I just visited a company today that does work for the Defense Department. They are extraordinarily innovative and providing new tools for our Army in particular. Very much concerned about the kinds of cuts that are coming along. And so my hope is that as it becomes ever more clear that what the impact of sequestration, that it is simply not the way for a country like the United States to budget, that we are able to get to the table and come up with a balanced approach.
Okay, thank you for that. Next, we are going to go to Joe from Clinton, but as Joe's getting on the line, I just want to remind everyone that if you would like to ask a question to the Congresswoman, please press *3 and you can ask the Congresswoman a question. And now, Joe from Clinton, you are live with the Congresswoman.
I think you mean Jerry.
Oh, Jerry, how are you?
I'm fine. The reason for my call, as you probably are aware, the Veterans Administration is more than a year and a half behind in payments to disabled veterans in processing the claims. And I was wondering if you've done anything personally to address the issue of getting a fire built under the feet of the Veterans Administration to get them moving on these disability claims.
Well, thank you for your question. I believe the backlog of our claims to our veterans is a challenge to the conscience of our country. We have people who have served us so ably many times over in some instances and who have suffered great harm as a result of it. And I think it's our fundamental obligation to have in place a system that addresses veterans' needs in a timely way. Last week, Democrats in Congress introduced a package of bills to promote innovation, speed up the claims process, which is really an egregious issue, and make it possible for the VA to reduce and eliminate the backlog and then really pay, especially when a claim is long overdue, pay up front what it is and then work it out later. It's money that we're going to have to pay anyway. We might as well make sure that our veterans have the money that they need to pay the rent and meet their other responsibilities. Secretary Shinseki has also taken steps to end the backlogs, and Secretary Hagel last week testified that he has directed the Pentagon to find ways to better integrate, and this is a real issue, the way in which we integrate military health records with the VA. So transferring the records from the active duty side to the VA side has been a real problem of compatibility, and the interoperability of the technology has been a real issue, one that I have been focused on. But I think there's a lot more we have to do. We owe it to our service members and their veterans, and I think this package that we just introduced holds real promise.
Okay, I believe the Congresswoman has a poll now.
Yes, as part of having everybody participate in this telephone town hall, I'd like to take the opportunity to ask some poll questions on the issues of the day. So the first one is, do you support universal background checks for all firearms purchases? Press 1 if you do support universal background checks. Press 2 if you do not support universal background checks. And a couple of questions down the line will give you the results.
Great. While you're answering that poll, we'll go to the next question. Just a reminder, if you would like to ask the Congresswoman a question, please press *3. And now we will go to Doug from Townsend. Doug, you're live with the Congresswoman.
Yes, we all know that the House of Representatives faces the tyranny of the majority. And is there any plans for the Democratic minority to deal with the current Republican strategy of forcing votes only when there's agreement of the majority of the majority?
Well, thank you for that question. You know, I came into Congress as a member of the majority. The Democrats had just regained the majority maybe 12 to 14 months before, no, not 10 months before I arrived there. And then we lost that majority 3.5 years later. And one of the things I immediately learned is that the party of the majority controls the agenda. So virtually every bill that is discussed in a committee setting, every bill that is reported out, what the form of that bill is, every bill that is brought to the floor of the House reflects the control of the majority. And that is quite something one has to learn going on. The other issue really is that within the Republican Party there is actually disagreement, and so in many instances, I've seen several instances where because the majority could not agree upon what way forward, they were not able to introduce legislation and actually had to pull, in some instances, had to pull it at the last minute. But I have to say that I'm on the House Armed Services Committee, and I'm very fortunate to be so because it is probably one of the least, if not the least partisan committee in the House of Representatives. And as a result, I've been able to work across the aisle and had some great successes. So, for example, on the issue of military sexual assault, I worked closely with Congressman Turner, a Republican member from Ohio. We recently introduced a bill called the Be Safe Act that for the first time would impact the powers of a commander to oversee decisions made by a jury. I think a very important step forward in limiting their power to overturn a jury verdict. I've taken a real interest in the body armor and its weight, and again have had success through both under Democratic rule of the House as well as under Republican rule, where we've made some real progress in lightening the weight of body armor, as well as tasking the services to develop body armor for women. And I became aware of a very important program for small businesses that help fund innovative companies, especially here in Massachusetts. We get the largest number of awards through this program, and worked on a bipartisan basis to protect the program so that small businesses who do not yet have access to venture capital can fund their innovation through a set-aside program across all the federal agencies. So, yes, the major pieces of legislation are really captive of the party of the majority, in which they cannot agree on among themselves in many instances. The reality is that virtually every bill that in the end is able to pass the House of Representatives and the Senate and make it to the President for signature has to have both Democratic votes and Republican votes. It's the only way that we can make progress. And that's why what you see in the case of immigration, it's going to be very important that as we go down the road, we have a bill that gets both Democratic and Republican support in order for us to finally move ahead and resolve that issue.
Great. And Congresswoman, I think we have some poll results.
We do. So on the issue of universal background checks for all firearms purchase, 86% of you said yes, you support universal background checks. 14% of you said no, you do not support universal background checks. Thank you. I share the view that we should have universal background checks.
Thank you. And just a reminder, if you'd like to ask the Congresswoman a question, please press *3. We'll now go to Patricia from Lunenburg. You are live with the Congresswoman.
Hi, Congresswoman. How are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you, Patricia?
I'm just fine. My question is basically on sequester. It's as, running our own personal household. Cutting our budget by 2% would not put my house into a tailspin. And I find it very alarming that a 2% cut in an increase has put this country into a tailspin. Now, my son's in the military, and I'm still for the 2% cut. There's a lot of waste in all parts of government, as has been shown as of yesterday by what happened in Massachusetts with all the fraud that's been happening in the welfare program. The fraud in all programs takes money away from people who need it.
Well,
we took 2% off the projected increase for that year. So we didn't actually cut any money out of anybody. Yet it's turned my country into a tailspin, and I don't understand why it could possibly do that. Are we that out of control that we can't handle a 2% cut?
Well, I share your view that the military can absorb additional cuts. But what I don't believe the best way forward is to have it across the board where they have no discretion as to where those cuts are going. The sequester, what it did is it basically said you go across all the different aspects to funding for federal government, all the different accounts, and it's a top line across the board cut. So the military doesn't have the capacity to move things around and say, this is where we need to put money, for example, on protecting the readiness of our soldiers so that our soldiers are well prepared to go into a fight and best defend themselves as they are seeking to defeat an enemy. So there's no discretion. It's the lack of discretion that is the issue. The Defense Department has also previously absorbed $500 billion, about $500 billion to $490 billion worth of cuts. So it's a twofold impact. The other reality is that the sequester only impacts 30% of the budget. So we're talking about those things that every year we make a decision about how to spend our money. We are not talking about the other 70% that we refer to as our entitlement programs, whether it's Social Security, whether it's Medicare, whether it's Medicaid, whether it's disability payments through the VA, whatever those may be. Those are automatic. We do not make any decisions about those in any given year. So the sequester only impacts 30% of the budget, and the reality is that as a result of that, it's a much higher impact than 2%. But I do agree with you that there is additional room for the military to absorb cuts. They have, number one, we're drawing down in our effort in Afghanistan. We've drawn down our effort in Iraq. We know that we always have to be prepared for whatever eventualities come our way and whatever other ways we need to protect our country. But just that alone leaves room for some thoughtful cutting. We don't need. I think there are programs we need to continue with. For example, on body armor, I don't think just because we're drawing down, we should stop the investment in figuring out how to lighten body armor. It's been very protective, but it's too heavy and causes injury. I've learned of some remarkable programs on how to let soldiers communicate on the ground with one another that we need to continue to fund because they're the future. How soldiers communicate with each other in very irregular kinds of war settings. But what we want is a situation in which the military has a capacity to make decisions and figure out what their total amount allocated is, and then figure out how best to spend it. But there are rooms still for additional cuts.
Thank you. And just a reminder to everyone on the call that if you'd like to ask the Congresswoman a question, please press *3. We'll now go to Rose from Clinton. You are on the line with the Congresswoman.
Hello,
Hi,
Rose.
thank you, Congresswoman, and thanks for inviting us to connect with you in our homes. It's a nice change from the usual setting.
Well, I'm glad to do it because it makes it much more. It makes it possible for many more people to participate.
Definitely. All right, my question is about housing. What are you doing to help homeowners in terms of mortgages, new buyers, and avoiding foreclosures? For example, strategies to make refinance easier or purchasing requirements, etc.
Well, on the most personal of levels, we are, because we know how challenging the housing situation has been for so many people, that we have a dedicated staffer here in our main office in Lowell who is dedicated to assisting constituents on housing issues. So on personal housing issues, we find that we can be a real resource. And I would encourage anybody who's on the line who has such an issue to call us. And the number here is 978-459-0101, and the individual is Amy. But on the bigger picture, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has, I think, been becoming a tremendous resource for the consumer. It was designed to be such, and I think has made some real strides. Number one, in simplifying the mortgage paperwork so that you know what on earth you're signing on to, making it, explaining things in plain language, and then working to hold banks accountable to that. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which was the brainchild of Elizabeth Warren and is up and running now, I think in this instance has already shown how it is going to be a real resource for consumers.
Great. Thank you, Congresswoman. We will now try to do the next poll question.
This next poll question is, what do you think Congress should do about the automatic budget cuts known as the sequester? And there will be three choices. Press 1 if you think Congress should replace the sequester with a balanced approach of targeted cuts and revenue. Press 2 if you think the sequester should stay in place as it is. And press 3 if you think there should be additional cuts to government services.
Great. And as you're answering that poll question, just a reminder, if you'd like to ask the Congresswoman a question, please press *3. Next, we will go to, I apologize if I get the name incorrect, I believe it's Adrian or Andrian from Pittsburgh?
Andrian, Pittsburgh, yeah, correct.
You're live with the Congresswoman.
Well, Congressman, I think it's wonderful that there are so many women now getting an education in Afghanistan and that they're also in the military. But culture is a very difficult thing to change. And, of course, their culture goes back centuries upon centuries. And what even guarantee, what hope do we have that once we leave, that will continue? Do people like President Karzai really support having women play a bigger role in life and play a role in the Army and the military services? Or do they just say this to us because they know we want to hear it? What is your take on that?
Well, I think for the future stability of the country is dependent upon having full participation of all of its citizens, and 50% are women. So I think he is committed to the future stability of his country. But, the test will come in a number of ways. Number one is that his government puts in place an election process that is free, open and fair, and that women are able to fully participate in. I think we as a government have to hold the Karzai administration's feet to the fire on that one. I think as the reconciliation process moves forward, I know I heard from so many Afghan women, the young students, as well as the many women leaders that were leading the way on so many issues, whether in Parliament or leading organizations that are designed to help the country. Very concerned that women are not at the table as those negotiations take place because absent their voices, it will be very easy to trade away those gains. And I think we're going to have to look at how we use our aid dollars, that we are going to be continuing to fund a lot of efforts there, and that we make sure that as a condition to that aid, these gains are not traded away. When we met with many women there, their simple plea was a couple of things. One is that we continue to lend our voice to the need to protect those gains and do it in every way possible. But second of all, they understand that they're going to have to fight the fight for themselves. But what they wanted is the space to do it. That is how they put it. We want the space to do that. So I think if we see the elections move forward in a way that women feel they have been able to participate, if we see women in a significant number and of significant stature at the table in the negotiation process, I think that's a hopeful sign. And I think that if we see our aid dollars tied to women's these gains for women, these will all be hopeful signs. I was glad to see Secretary Kerry begin to include, as he talks about the future of Afghanistan, the need to protect the gains for women, women in particular. So we'll have to do it on a lot of fronts. There's no easy answer here. But I think President Karzai recognizes that this is something. It needs to recognize that this is something the American government, at the very least, feels very strongly about, and that there are many, many women in Afghanistan who themselves feel very strongly and are able to give strong voice to it.
Great. And now for some poll results.
In terms of the answer to your opinions about the sequester, 70% of you said you thought Congress should replace the sequester with a balanced approach of targeted cuts in revenue. 10% said you thought the sequester should stay in place as it is, and 20% think there should be additional cuts to government services. So I endorse the approach that would have a balanced approach where there are still cuts, but there is revenue as well in order to protect the programs that are very important to our future.
Great. And now we're going to turn to Dave from Lunenburg. Dave, you're live with the Congresswoman.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for giving me the opportunity to speak to you. What I'd like to talk about is Social Security, and I don't understand. Every time you read about funding Social Security, it always stops at like $109,000 or something like that in terms of wages. What is your feeling about continuing this and just applying it to all money made in the country and not having a free ride for everybody that's past $109,000? And also I was wondering, why is it that the government considers Social Security, and you mentioned it previously, an entitlement, when we paid all these years into it, and it's actually our money that we're getting back? I'd like to have your opinion on that.
Well, I absolutely agree that as we look at how to strengthen and protect Social Security, we're going to have to look at the cap on the amount of wages that we tax and subject to the Social Security assessment. I think we have to be very careful. We don't want to drive people out of the Social Security system, but it's going to require sort of some thoughtful analysis as to where, if we move the line up, where we draw the line. So in order to keep people in the system, it's very important that we keep people in the system as we go forward. And entitlement is really a term of art. It really, what it means is it is a program in which in the federal government we do not make decisions every year as to what the funding stream will be. It's really a way of saying this is a point at which we have no decision-making capacity in any given year, as opposed to it's not meant to reflect that, yes, of course, it's a result of many years of people's hard work and contributing to the system.
Just a reminder, if you'd like to ask the Congresswoman a question, please press *3. We will now turn to Russell from Clinton. Russell, you are live with the Congresswoman.
Yes, Congresswoman. Thank you for your service to our district and country.
Thank you, Russell.
My concern is watching the newspaper each morning and TV naturally, but it seems like you're preaching to the choir here in Massachusetts. We have 9 Democratic Congress representatives and 2 Democratic senators pretty much. It doesn't appear to me that anything is possible to get through Congress. If it's the party of no, if it's anything to do with the word Obama, then it's no. And it can't even be brought to a vote. Anything from a judge to a bill. And although some of these things are passing around the fringes, I haven't seen anything constructive. I mean, the student loans are in a tither, the tax situation, everything is in an upheaval. And how do you get something actually passed so the President of the United States can actually sign it?
Well, it's a great question, and I know you're not alone with those online who are concerned with this. And I have to say, last week, as we took our almost 40th vote on repealing the Accountable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, knowing that it was not had no hope of being brought to the floor in the Senate or ever being signed into law by our president. You do. I know I have my moments where I get very frustrated as well. But I think we know how to get things done. As I said in response to an earlier question, virtually everything that has passed out of the House and has passed out and then made its way and passed out of the Senate and is signed into law by our president requires bipartisan support. It has to have, it won't get all the Republicans because among themselves they do not agree, and it won't necessarily get all the Democrats because there may be aspects to it that some Democrats agree or disagree with, but it has to have support of both parties. And so we will see that. We will have to see that if immigration reform is to move forward. A lot of bipartisan effort has been going into it on both sides of Congress. A group in the Senate has been working hard on this, has bipartisan representation. A group in the House has bipartisan representation. And the indications are that, there's a hopeful signs that we will be able to move forward on this. And the reality is that is the only way that progress can be made. As I said, I'm fortunate to be on one of the least partisan committees in the House, the House Armed Services Committee. We have a commitment every year to producing a bill. All the work of that committee is wrapped into one piece of legislation. It will be marked up in the committee, and that's the process by which we go through it and assess all the aspects to it and vote it out of committee next week. It will be brought to the floor. It will pass the House of Representatives with votes on both sides of the aisle, and then it will make its way, or the Senate will do the same thing, and then it will make its way to conference. I mean, that is the way Congress should work. It means you often have to hold your nose and accept something in it you don't like. None of us can get everything we want. It's not possible. But what I have learned as I've been in Washington is we are a very diverse country, and we are very much shaped by the places we come from. And I feel very fortunate to come from Massachusetts for so many reasons. We have proven to be a leader on so many fronts. But there are other parts of the country who have a wholly different view, and that is what we wrestle with in Congress. But I remain confident that when push comes to shove, we can get it done. But I wish it weren't so halting. I wish it weren't so messy and oftentimes so ugly.
Great. Thank you for that question. Just as a reminder, if you'd like to ask the Congressman a question, please press *3. And Kirk from Marlboro, you are now live with the Congresswoman.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Kirk.
A lot of the things that I wanted to ask about have been touched on in one way or the other, including my concerns with the sequester, which I basically think should be repealed. I guess your first choice that you gave us in the poll kind of encompasses that idea. But along with that is I'm very concerned. I've noticed how the deficit has dropped I'm very happy to see, very precipitously, the biggest drop in our debt since the Second World War. Yet we still have a failure to grow sufficient jobs. And I know a lot of that is because of opposition from certain elements in the Congress to any kind of expenditures in programs such as infrastructure, which the collapse of the bridge in Washington State and one in Minnesota a year or so ago shows that we're really in desperate need of improving our infrastructure and transportation systems. I was wondering what could be done along the lines of reforming the sequester, i.e. repealing it altogether, and starting to invest in our infrastructure as a matter of growing jobs.
Well, I think your example of the Washington State Bridge collapse is a great example of just the necessity for doing so. And while it addresses real problems, by investing in infrastructure, it addresses real problems, we know that it is a job creator as well. And I, for one, believe that the federal government has to be a strategic partner in investing in our communities. We do that on the ground here through our economic development and working closely with our communities around projects that are important to them and they see as important to the future. But we also have to do it at the highest policy level. So in Washington, I did vote for a budget that would encourage job creation by investing in the high-tech manufacturing and innovation. We are home to extraordinary clean energy companies across this district, which represent, I think, a real potential sector for growth in our regional economy. Again, if we invest in infrastructure, but also in research and development, again, we are a state that excels at that. We are home to, again, to so many companies, so many research facilities, so many universities that are leading the way. And, we have to invest in education to make sure that we are producing young people that have the skills necessary to do these jobs. So, repealing the sequester will probably, if it happens, we have to remember the sequester is to take place over 10 years. If we don't address it, these cuts just continue going on year after year after year. But we have to do it in a way that's balanced, that puts revenue on the table, as well as recognizes that there's a need to continue to be more thoughtful about how we're spending our dollars.
Great, and now I think we'll do our third poll question.
This poll question is, what do you think is the most important issue facing Congress this summer? And there will be 4 choices. One is press 1 for job creation, press 2 for passing a budget, press 3 for fixing the immigration system, and press 4 if you think it's something other than one of those 3 things.
Okay, and now we're going to turn to Donna from Fitchburg. You are live with the Congresswoman.
Yes, Congresswoman, thank you so much for organizing this. It's wonderful to speak with you.
Thank you, Donna.
You're very welcome, and I'm so happy to know that you have been visiting our service members overseas, and I want you to encourage that. To go forward with that. Also, I'm a little concerned about the sequestration affecting the military. I'm the daughter of a disabled vet, and I just can't see cutting money to the military at all. I mean, maybe you can eliminate paper clips. Maybe they're spending too much money on vending machines or whatever, but I really think that we need to support our military as much as we can. In fact, Ronald Reagan never would have allowed anything like what happened in Benghazi. Or if it happened under his watch, there would have been retribution. And I just want to make my opinion known on that. And thank you for your attention to Pakistani women. I hope that they'll be protected after we leave. That is very important. And I guess that's all.
Well, thank you, Donna, for your comments. This district, this new 3rd district, which now goes from Haverhill to Gardner, all along the New Hampshire border, and then down to Clinton, Marlborough, and then sweeps around and has Concord, Acton, makes its way back up to Lowell. Is home to a remarkable number of those who've served. It's a multi-generational tradition. Wherever I go, I meet people who are serving or who have family members who have served, both in their immediate families, but often over generations. And so we're deeply steeped in and deeply willing to serve our country. So I think it's so important as we go forward that we do all we can to protect our veterans. Veterans' payments in and of themselves are not affected by the sequester. And the military itself, in the first round of thoughtful cuts through the Budget Control Act, recognized that it had to absorb some cuts and was open to it. And I think actually still recognizes that there are additional ways to make thoughtful cuts. What it cannot do well is when it has no discretion and has to, and also to the degree that it has to make the second round of cuts. That's where the real problem comes through the sequester and the total amount that it's having to absorb over a very short period of time. So I think it is open to thinking carefully about better ways to spend the dollars that it is given, but it has to have some decision-making powers to do it. And so that's why we have to be very thoughtful. The furloughs that are taking place at, for example, at Hanscom, are falling on the civilian part of our service. These are people who have extreme capability, who serve over many, many years. I know at Hanscom, very able to participate and protect the Air Force and promote its acquisition of new technologies that really do help in the future. Military personnel themselves, however, are not subjected to these furloughs. So it's a complicated issue. We want to be sure we're preparing our soldiers for whatever comes their way. That's called readiness, and that we're also equipping them as best we can in meeting all the new, providing them with those technological advances that make real sense and really do make a difference in their survivability on the field, out as they engage in a fight.
Thank you for that question. Now we have some poll results.
So on this poll, what do you think is the most important issue facing Congress this summer? 36% of you felt it was job creation. 23% said passing a budget. 21% fixing the immigration system. And 20% said other. For those who said other, if you stay on the line after this teletown hall ends, you could let us know what you thought the other was. So I thank you for that.
Great. We have time for one more question, and as the Congresswoman said, after this question, at the end of the call, you will be able to have the opportunity to leave the Congressman a voicemail with your question, and you will get a response. So with that, I would like to turn to Bashir from Fitchburg. I believe it's Bashir. You are live with the Congresswoman.
Good afternoon, Ms. Sangas. How are you?
Good evening, Bashir.
Yeah, I met with you in Fitchburg Library, and by talking with you, I have an impression that you are an honest person, and you are trying your best as one vote in the Congress to do whatever is possible, and you just follow your husband, Mr. Sanga, and I am completely satisfied by your answer all through this conference call.
Oh, well, thank you.
As regard nobody can do anything. Like in the time of President Reagan, how many Marines they were killed, and he couldn't do anything. So same thing, Benghazi, it's done. It's happened. Nobody wanted to should happen. So it's not somebody has purposely did something to happen. So my concern is it can happen anytime. Like I said, at the time of President Reagan, how many Marines they were killed in Beirut, I think?
I don't recall the number, yeah.
Yeah, 220.
Wow.
I recall the number. And what he could do? Nothing. So
we can learn from our mistakes, though, and I do think that the Accountability Review Board that Secretary Clinton put together took a close look at the State Department's response and its preparations or anticipation of what was happening there. I think there were many, many shortcomings, and they have moved to really fix a lot of those shortcomings. My committee, on the Armed Services Committee, looked at the military's response to it. And both in it, and as Secretary Gates said, were he the one who looked at the choices that were being made, he would have made the same decisions that our military made on the spot. But our military also did learn from it, and one of the real shortcomings was that we have no bases on the African continent. So we have to position ourselves to respond in a timely way in Europe to anything that happens on the African continent. And we have done that. So they've put in place a unit that could respond within an hour if something were to take place. It doesn't account for the distances. There are huge distances that have to be traveled. But that was the response of the Defense Department. And again, the State Department, I think, has moved to make some very important changes.
Great. And with that, Congresswoman, would you have any closing remarks?
Yes, I just wanted to thank you all for participating in tonight's Teletown Hall meeting. As always, this discussion was so useful to me. It's my great honor to represent a district that now goes from Haverhill in the east and includes Methuen, Lawrence, Lowell, Fitchburg, Gardner. It goes down to Clinton and Marlboro, and then the great towns of Concord, Acton, Stowe, Lancaster, a remarkably diverse district, but one that is in particular characterized by small to mid-sized cities, and it's a real honor for me to represent this great district that has such diversity of people, such diversity of places. If I wanted to say, if I didn't have a chance to get to your question this evening, there will be an opportunity to leave me a voicemail in just a minute, and we'd be happy to get back to you on your question. It is very important that if you want to get an answer to your question, that you leave your name, your address, your phone number, and an email address. You can also visit my website at www.tsongas.house.gov or follow me on Facebook and Twitter to learn more about what I'm working on, or to email me any thoughts or questions. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Rep Tsongas, and on Twitter at Nikki in the House. Thanks again for choosing